So Partholón started in 2015, myself and Howard. We've been friends for years and we've been in a number of bands before that, going back to Sludgehook in the 90s, and then out of that came Five Will Die. We had a great group of lads there in Five Will Die. We called it a day in 2015 and myself and Howard just continued the adventure together. So we wanted to do something a little more in the post-metal vein. So we got a guitarist and a bass player on board and we started Partholón. Released our first EP in 2016, followed by the single All We Are in 2017. The new album has been years in the making, really. The songs were written and the album was more or less recorded, and then COVID hit, and it gave us the opportunity to work on the songs a bit more and to develop them a bit more with the newer band members, and it's I think it's a better album for it. I'm very proud of where the album is now, although it's taken a very long time to get here. It's been a real journey, and we look forward to writing some new songs with our new band members and more albums going forward.
So throughout the album, there's a sort of thematic, consistent, and a lot of stuff that I'm talking about and singing about is based from experiences with this boat here, built in the 1930s. A lot of experiences would have been with other people, with mostly my grandfather and father, it really is. And we talk about a lot of stuff on that boat over the years, but there's a line in there called "A slave to tradition holds the key to absolute freedom out in the sea." And there's a perception about occupation, particularly things like fishing, but occupation in general. I think everybody experiences is where people feel like you're trapped in something, and it's the complete opposite. You know, when you're fishing, there is a freedom to it. It's not a slave to tradition at all. It's absolute freedom. So this boat plays a huge part in the album, right through it, from the first song to the last song, but particularly in the last song, We Swallow the Ocean. But we have a thing up here called the perch, and that's where my father sits and oversees the work that's done on the boat. And at this current time, the salmon season's a couple of weeks out, and the boat has been overturned to be treated for barnacles and things like that. So it's a bit like an NCT. But it's fascinating to think that this boat is almost 90 years of age, and very little work done to it. You know, yeah, it's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of tradition that makes me quite emotional when I think about it. But yeah, the album really is a reflection on times that are gone and never coming back. And this boat, yeah, a lot of memories, a lot of memories. So I think everybody has that moment when they're growing up. I don't know, when you're about 8 or 9 years old, and all of a sudden you're kind of plugged into the world. There's like an epiphany. You kind of realise things a little bit more than what's actually in front of you. So when I was a kid, I used to sit here between the pillars and wait for my father and grandfather to go get the boat, to come back, to go out fishing. And in that 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so, you're left to your own thoughts as an 8 or 9 year old, and you're thinking about stuff. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, sky's a little different, and it's like eureka moments. So you're born between pillars really means that it's awakening of the brain. It's like literally being plugged into reality, getting that sort of jolt of electricity that makes you conscious. So that's what happened to me, sitting here between these 2 pillars 30 odd years ago with my grandfather and father out the boat and coming back in and trying to convey those thoughts to them and have them make sense of them for you. It's a really interesting time. We'd see a lot of stuff like shooting stars. We'd see a lot of stuff of like, back then if you saw a satellite, it was a UFO because you didn't have the modern understanding of these things. But it would just open your world up to the place being bigger than your brain, you know? So this is what it's about. Yeah, born between pillars is me sitting here, this very spot, waiting for my grandfather and father to come back and all the thoughts that came with that. So that's what the song was, the genesis of the song was about. So one of the things I would have thought down here while I was waiting to be picked up between pillars would have been the Mary Russell tragedy in Cork Harbour, where Captain Stewart had a ship and he murdered, basically went insane. He was in the Caribbean, returning to Cork Harbour, went insane en route and battered 7 guys to death on board, on deck. He bound their hands in chains and just bludgeoned them to death over the skull. And there was a guy there called James Rain who witnessed everything and brought it to people's attention. It was horrific. But they're buried on high land up here, up in the old graveyard overlooking the harbour. But Pillars is essentially swaying into that world, trying to get that from the perspective of James Rain. Was he complicit? Was he a hero? It's hard to know. But what's sad to think about is William Stewart lived his life out in Cove in a bit of luxury for himself. The inquest, obviously he was a British officer, so he was never going to be prosecuted. But they couldn't hide from the fact, so he was declared insane. But he never went to jail. He just, you know, lived his life out. Where these families here in Passage were mourning 15 and 17-year-olds, just fucking crazy, like. So at that time I would have been 11 or 12, and just to think that in 3 years' time I could be on a ship to the Caribbean and dead. You know, it's just this sort of, like I said, it's like being plugged in, realising something's bigger than yourself, and history repeats, and you kind of go, that's the history I don't want to fucking repeat, you know? I want to go fishing, I don't want to be part of a maritime tragedy. But I'm fascinated by that story, I'm fascinated by the sense of adventure to go to somewhere like the Caribbean at that time and put your lives in the hands of a British officer. And, you know, he let them down. But you got to have some sort of affiliation with the adventure that was in those boys' brains when they were heading out there in the first place. But yeah, it's a sad tragedy, and yeah, I spent a lot of time sitting here between those pillars thinking about that. So here we are 30 years later, and I'm writing a song about it. So during the pandemic, obviously everybody had these restrictions on their freedoms and ideologies, and everything just came together in a big mess. But there was a period of time where everybody was getting used to this new way of living, the first couple of weeks, a couple of months, where we didn't know how long we were going to be locked down. But they enforced a 2 kilometre, you couldn't leave your home more than 2 kilometres, the restrictions or whatever. So I used to come here, down here to this same spot every day, because it's only up the road from my place and it's a bit closed in. Not a lot of people come in here anyway. But I used to be staring at the fucking stars every evening, just the same spot every evening for about a year, and just tracing my fingers along it, trying to get some sort of understanding of it without knowing anything about it. I know nothing about space or anything like that. I know the bare minimum, you know, but just coming from kind of a layman's terms and not understanding and trying to understand. So I used to just use basically my finger to trace circles across the sky. And you start thinking about this circular thinking. And you think back to the Spanish flu and all the same stuff happened, and you start to get into this, everything's just repeating itself in this massive, unstoppable circle of behaviour. Everybody's conspiracy theories, everybody's grievances, everybody's fears, everybody's loves, everything that you fucking think about in these difficult situations. But it just felt like this was another swing around the circle to come back here. But I stood down there every day for about 365 days, I'd say, close to a year, just doing the same stuff over and again, trying to figure out where stuff was, trying to figure out, orientate yourself when everything was just so out of control and we had no idea what was coming. We weren't playing gigs, we couldn't practice, couldn't meet our fucking friends, we couldn't do anything like that. So for me to come back down here was just to retrace our steps, reorientate, recalibrate. And yeah, I'm very grateful for it, really fucking am. So it was that thinking that informed that song. That thinking informed the lyrics on it. And yeah, it's almost sad to fucking think about, it really is, but that's the way life was for a while. And thankfully we've come out the other side of it for now. But you know, someone's watching this in 100 years' time and they're thinking, yep, it happened again, fucker.
So I guess through various meetings at gigs, after gigs, before gigs and whatever, you know, Howard had always been teasing about the recordings and the new album coming out and possibly sending on a scratch track here and there. So fast forward then to around September 23 and the rumour mill was getting a little bit bigger that the release was coming up fairly soon. So I got a call from Howard, I think one Friday evening, explaining what they had done in the recording process with the album and what they were hoping to do in relation to imagery and artwork and whatever. So he asked me if I was interested in doing the photography for it. And I guess it's something you can't say no to. For number one, friends of yours, and also for being a huge fan of the band and having somebody, a good friend and a band again, asking you to provide imagery from your collection or something bespoke for the album cover, something I've always wanted to do. Like I said, you couldn't say no to it. It was both frightening and exciting all at the same time. After speaking to Howard at length, you know, we decided to come down to Cork, down to Passage West, and you know, he was explaining the inspiration for the album and gave me a tour of the area with his dad on the boat that day and just giving me the history of the area in general and how the songs came about, which was very, very interesting. You know, I sort of went down a rabbit hole on one of the songs, or the stories behind Pillars, and that was on the Mary Russell. But you know, they were trying to explain what type of imagery might fit the story and their vision for the cover for the band. So went away and thought about that a bit more, did a bit of research into the area, and I suppose after many texts and conversations later and ideas about what they'd like, you know, I provided a good sample of images for them to go through, and with them having free rein to adjust those images as they please, you know. So I think we were trying to look for something that wasn't, as Alan said, a hotel room poster frame for a picture, something a little bit more outstanding, maybe minimalist, and that's what they went with in the end. So, you know, where you can make something really pop rather than just having your bog standard image. Again, in choosing the image, I think the guys had mentioned that they didn't want to go down, they were taking a break from maybe the artwork route, but also didn't want to go down the AI route, which I'm not a fan of anyway, so at least we were in agreement on that. They wanted to choose somebody who was, you know, like a creative or an artist, photography in this case, to provide something that might add to the vision of what they had in front of them. But I think that's where photography, or the ask, came in initially. The guys probably knew that I was involved in photography in some way and had probably looked at the website or the Instagram. And I think they were interested in that, which was good, and that sort of brought our paths together again.
And so Light Chamber is a song about family. It's a historical family. So I had this uncle, he was kind of a granduncle, Paul Fitzsimons was his name, and he did some research into our ancestry.com type stuff, where he just went to the library and got a few bits of information. And he traced us back to this family from Glynn in North Limerick. And they were part of the Knights of Glynn, which was a guild at the time. They used to be sort of, custodians of a certain part of the diocese or whatever it was. John Fitzgerald, and I think it was Michael. And he had his brother killed in order to take his place. So his brother was in this position as Knight of Glynn, and he said, fuck that, I'm taking that back. So he had him killed, he had his head cut off, he was hung, drawn and quartered, and his mother carried his head through the streets of Limerick, and she was lifting it above her head like this, and she was drinking from it. And there was I think it was 80 keening women were with her in this procession of just fucking grim procession of people pulling along. But I changed some of the names in it to the Fitzsimons just as a mark of respect to my uncle. He passed since, and he had this wild way of just explaining family to me. And anybody that's ever hunted for identity of some sort, there's parts of your identity it's very hard to be proud of. And he had a way of highlighting that in a way that was just a bit fucking daft. And it really, really stuck with me. So writing this song, Light Chamber, it was the illumination of bad things within a family, and just having to be able to take on board that history does repeat itself, and you can't pick who you're related to. As proud as you can be about that, at the same time, there's aspects of everybody's character that you want to do better with. And it's thinking back to those times where a brother had his brother killed out of jealousy, and had his mother carry his severed head down the road. I mean, can't really be proud of that. And you kind of have to think to yourself, if history does repeat, you have to stop that shit happening. You got to just be a better version of it. But Light Chamber illuminating that badness of character that you have to address, that you have to be conscious of, not proud of, but conscious of, and push it right back down. So writing a song about it seems to be the counterproductive thing to do, is to highlight these things. But you got to own it. You are what you are, and you got to just, as I said, be conscious. Be conscious. So, Skin of the Beast was probably the oldest song that we had on there. It was written back when the mind frame was still in the Partholón legend. So it's speaking about Delgnat, who was Partholón's wife, and her motivations and her wishes, and her desires, how she went about getting it, and how she kind of manipulated the situation so that she could have Partholón back in her life. And at the time when I was writing it was purely based on that. It's purely based on that legend, where essentially he heads off, and when he comes back, he kisses her to say, I'm back, and he tastes her lover on her lips and decides somebody's been acting a maggot here and ends up executing him and her dog. And it just seemed to me that this was a manipulative way of her of removing all these things that are important to him, so that it was only her left that he had to come back to. And part of you can kind of relate to that a little bit, and trying to hold someone close to you. But what happened in the meantime is I'm somewhat estranged from a part of my family, and it was around that time that occurred. So in writing that song, all this other stuff was going on that was very, very difficult to process at the time. So the myth and legend, just life imitated art in the most visceral fucking way that I could possibly imagine. And I'm still reeling from the effects of that, but this song just became something completely different. It really, really is about as intimate as I could possibly get with lyrics and music and so on. Still reeling from it today. It's a really, really difficult song to play live. It's I'm really proud of it in some ways, but I feel like it's one of those songs where I don't think we'll play it forever. For me, it's just too fucking, it's too on the nose. It was a difficult period of time in my life. We're going back 6-7 years here, and you know, I still have sleepless nights about it. I really do. It's really, really fucking difficult to deal with. But that's part of what this is all about. It's about coping with fucking life and whatever it throws at you. You know, so writing these songs is it's essential to us. Whatever it means to anybody else is irrelevant, but to us as individuals, that song for me in particular, be fucked without it. It really, really would. So, yeah. Treasure what you have and don't be afraid to let it go.